Tonight on Bridge City News, the Lethbridge Police Commission report is out, and it shows that calls have gone up to the police around the Lethbridge Supervised consumption site. Lethbridge Police discuss how you can protect yourself and your business from a new scam making the rounds. And we hear from former Reform Party leader Preston Manning, who says Western alienation is real and needs to be addressed.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Calls for police to go out to and around the Lethbridge Supervised consumption site have gone up around 6,000% between 2017 and this year. Now that's according to new figures released by the Lethbridge Police.
Statistically, it can be a little bit alarming. When you look at it, it's 400 and some calls, right? Which, again, if you do the math, very simply, we're there every day, and sometimes more than once a day. And I think that's what's causing a lot of people concerns as to for safety and some of the things. Law-abiding citizens are being, victimized by car prowlings and break-and-enters. And that's something as a police service that we're currently looking at do we have to look at some different options in deployment to try and deal with some of these things that the community is concerned about and are dealing with daily. So that's where we're heading right now with that.
Wood says there's a misconception that there is a safe zone around the safe consumption site, which is false. The police will arrest anyone engaged in any criminal activity, including drug possession, around the site. The only exception made by the federal government is within the safe consumption site itself. SACPA heard today about how the Arches recovery coaching model is the first of its kind in the world. Joey Blood and Jerry Firth presented the Arches Indigenous Recovery Coach program and how there's a cultural lens on it.
Addictions is a very complex issue, and so is recovery. And it's an opportunity for us to have a real dialogue and discussions around what that looks like and what that means, and specifically for our program, how it fits within the continuum of care for folks that are maybe currently in active use and maybe questioning or exploring the idea of recovery, into as far as those that are doing well and relatively maintaining it, but just need extra supports to help them sort of continue to maintain their recovery in that.
The job isn't easy. Dealing with addictions is already a pretty tough subject, But when we don't have the support and the support from the community, and I'm not saying the whole community, but when there's certain people that aren't on board, it does make it a bit difficult. So it's just hopes that people take it for what it is, and that's that we're here to help and trying to provide that support, not only with our participants, but trying to help the community feel a sense of relief that there's people in place trying to help.
Blood grew up on the Blood Reserve and is now an Indigenous recovery coach through Arches. Firth is the program manager with the Indigenous Recovery Coach program. He also works at Arches. The speakers talked about scenarios that are at play and what they learned from the first year of the program. Lethbridge Police have a warning about another scam that is making the rounds. It is called the CEO fraud scam. It is when scammers send an email impersonating an executive of a company requesting a wire transfer of funds to a third party. The spoofed email looks like it came from the actual executive. Upon receipt, an unsuspecting employee complies. Once the fraud is detected, the funds are long gone. Last month, the city of Saskatoon was victimized by the scam and lost more than $1 million. Lethbridge Police say they are aware of 2 CEO frauds locally. In one case, $350,000 was scammed. Lethbridge Police say, as a business owner, there are ways you can protect yourself from the scam.
My advice would be simply training. So in addition to prevention methods, such as making sure you always do these types of transactions in person, I would recommend that you train your employees or train those people within your corporation that have the authority to move money, to manage money, move money in any degree. Train them about this fraud, make sure they're aware of it, and ensure that there are safeguards in place, that there are strict policies in place within your corporation to make sure that you can't fall victim to the scam.
Each year, 2,100 North Americans are killed or seriously injured because of unsafe behavior around railroad tracks. This week is to promote rail safety in Canada and the United States. CP Rail Canada says that in many of these accidents, they're simply because of trespassing and people not paying attention when driving.
Trespassing incidents are always a concern, especially when we have trespassers that are wearing earphones, headphones, talking on their cell phone. They don't hear the train. So those are a big concern to any police officer and the staff and support staff with CP Rail. A train is coming down the tracks. It can take up to a mile for that train to stop when it does see something. So it doesn't stop like a car or a truck. It can take up to a mile for that train to come to a complete stop. Throughout Alberta, we have officers stationed at strategic locations. We have fantastic working relationships with Lethbridge Police Service, Taber Police Service, Medisnap Police Service, and the RCMP. With those relationships, they enable us and assist us in passing our rail safety message along, as well as any enforcement or education programs that we put in place. Regardless of the location, whether it's at a active crossing, a crossing as you see here with just crossbucks, school zones, people are reminded to stay vigilant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, keep their eyes on a swivel, check both ways when they're walking across the tracks to ensure their own personal safety. Whenever there's any type of tragic incident, it has a massive impact on not just the families and the friends and the community, but also on the CP employees that are involved in it. CP does offer counseling for those employees to ensure that they get through these rough times as well.
According to the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, there have been 7 railway fatalities in Alberta this year. Now, have you ever looked at a fictional map like Narnia and wondered what's actually there? Worlds Imagined, the Maps of Imaginary Places, is a new exhibit at the Galt Museum and Archives. It takes a closer look at maps of fiction and fantasy.
This exhibit is called Worlds Imagined, the Maps of Imaginary Places collection, and it was created by the Cushing Memorial Archives at the Texas A&M University. And it explores different imaginary worlds that have been created as part of literature, as part of video games, films, etc. And so it's really a delve into the kinds of imaginary worlds that authors and creative personnel have used to advance plots in different storylines, to explore different imaginary worlds that are parts of fictional stories, and really get into some of the imaginary places, the way that maps can fire up our imagination.
The exhibit will run at the Galt Museum from September 27th through January 5th. Inspired by young Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, a local climate activist will be bringing her concerns about climate change to Lethbridge City Hall tomorrow from 4 till 6 p.m. 16-year-old Cindy Whitting, along with the Climate Strike YQL, will be doing a climate strike in front of City Hall. Whitting says she expects around 50 people of all ages to be there, including many youth, the raging grannies, and university professors. Whitting says her strike will be a peaceful one and non-confrontational. She says she just wants to raise awareness of climate change and the lasting effects of political, social, and economic inaction. Earlier today, Prince Harry piped in on climate change. He said no one can deny the science that the Earth is warming.
I don't think there's anyone that's not involved in conservation in somehow or shouldn't be involved in conservation somehow. I think like this last week, led by Greta, the world's children are striking. I think there's an emergency that it's a race against time, and one in which we are losing. Everyone knows it. There's no excuse for not knowing that. And I think the most troubling part of it is that I don't believe that there's anybody in this world that can deny science, undeniable science and facts. Science and facts that has been around for the last 30, maybe 40 years, and it's only getting stronger and stronger.
The battle is real. On one side, you have climate change activists and environmentalists fighting pipeline expansion, and then on the other side, you have the energy sector trying to generate revenue by building more pipelines. Bill C-69 has been a contentious issue even after receiving royal assent and becoming law in Canada. Premier Jason Kenney has referred to C-69 as the No More Pipelines Act. U of L political science professor Dr. Jeffrey Hale stopped by our studio recently and explained in more detail why Kenney has a problem with C-69.
Given the fact that provinces own and control their resources, to say, for a federal party to say, we're going to shut down the biggest industry in a province is inviting a constitutional battle that is reminiscent of what Mr. Trudeau Sr. walked into in the 1980s.
Catch my full interview with Dr. Hale discussing what some of the big federal election issues are and who may form the next government. That's coming up after business news. 2 people charged after an Amber Alert was issued in our province have waived their right to a preliminary hearing. Charmaine Darnell and D'Artagnan Poole have elected to be tried by judge and jury on charges that include abduction of a person under the age of 14. Poole, who is from Lethbridge, and Darnell of Whitecourt were arrested after 3 kids aged 9 months, 3 and 4 were taken from a home in Fox Creek on June 1st. The children were found later unharmed inside of a vehicle spotted by RCMP near Sylvan Lake about 2 hours after the Amber Alert was issued. Our province's advanced education minister says his office is still determining its response to a report that recommends the government look at consolidating the province's 26 post-secondary institutions. Dimitrios Nicolaides says he will announce soon action on the report by a panel appointed to look at government spending. The panel called Alberta's post-secondary system as rudderless and filled with duplication and overlap. Nicolaides was asked about the report while announcing details of a new 19-member task force focusing on boosting apprenticeship enrollment. The nonprofit group that operates helicopter ambulances in Saskatchewan says it is a step closer to upgrading its fleet of new aircraft. STARS, which stands for Shock Trauma Air Rescue Society, unveiled its new chopper in Saskatoon. The new Airbus H-145 chopper will enter service later this fall. It'll be one of 3 that operate out of Regina and Saskatoon. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says the new helicopters will allow STARS to better provide high-quality medical care for folks in Saskatchewan. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau paddled a canoe in front of the cameras today before promising to protect more of Canada's land and oceans by the year 2025. On the eve of Friday's worldwide climate action, Trudeau said a re-elected Liberal government would also expand a program that allows lower-income families to experience camping in Canada.
The people in this beautiful part of the country know firsthand how great it is to spend your weekends camping. The joy of roasting marshmallows with the kids or jumping into the lake on a hot summer day, you just can't beat it. But not all Canadians are so lucky, and we want to change that. That's why a re-elected Liberal government will expand the Learn to Camp program so that by the time they reach grade 8, all Canadian kids will have had the opportunity to experience camping and learn important outdoor skills.
People's Party of Canada leader Maxine Burnie was also on the campaign trail. He talked about putting up a guarded border fence in Quebec to prevent illegal border crossers.
We'll have a fence at the Roxham Road, just there, but instead of our RCMP officers being there and telling them, yes, you can cross illegally our border, you can come to Canada, we'll have our RCMP officer on the other side of the fence, and they will tell them, you want to come to Canada? You will come, but not here. Just cross the border over there, where everybody is crossing the border at an official port of entry.
The founder of the Federal Reform Party of Canada is concerned with alienation across our country. Preston Manning believes this could lead to a major divide. He says populist anger is real in Western Canada and needs to be addressed.
These extreme opinions are usually at opposite ends of the issue, so it's more divisive. And that's why I was trying to urge these people that I think a lot more attention has to be given to constructive alternatives, even if it involves redoing the terms and conditions on which Confederation operates so that it's less polarized rather than more polarized. The populist dimension of the environmental movement, it can't be ignored. It has to be addressed. The populist dimension of Western alienation, it can't be ignored. It has to be addressed. The possibility of a revival of separatism in Quebec, I don't think can be ignored. It has to be addressed. So I think that's the key to at least starting down a constructive channel with respect to populism.
At least one confirmed tornado touchdown as severe storms ripped through western Wisconsin. Many homes and businesses were severely damaged.
With all this damage, all the winds, and apparently in a tornado that touched down, we have no fatalities. We have no report of any serious injury. We're very fortunate here out in the town of Wheaton.
I don't know where to begin. I don't even know where to start. This is a hard hit to take. I finally felt like I was getting ahead and back on track, and then it just took everything away.
I've never seen anything like this in my life. You see pictures, but when you see it in person, it just, you can't really begin to believe what you're seeing.
A strong earthquake earlier today killed at least 3 people, injuring many others, and damaged a hospital, bridge, and set other buildings on fire on one of Indonesia's less populated islands. Today's quake came 2 days ahead of the first anniversary of the devastating 7.5 magnitude quake in Palu, which claimed more than 4,000 lives. Many of the victims were buried when entire neighborhoods were swallowed up. Things got quite heated in Britain's Parliament today. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson dared his foes to topple him a day after Britain's highest court ruled he acted illegally in suspending the body ahead of the Brexit deadline at the end of the month.
I say it is time to get Brexit done. Get Brexit done so we respect the referendum. Get Brexit done so we can move on. Let's get Brexit done so we can start to reunite this country after the divisions of the referendum rather than having another one. This Parliament must either stand aside and let this government get Brexit done or bring a vote of confidence and finally face the day of reckoning with the voters.
Always a colourful time in the UK Parliament. Lots of colour here as well as the leaves are changing. Another beautiful autumn day in Lethbridge, but enjoy the mild temperatures now since the mercury will be falling. I'll have a complete look at the weather picture in just a moment. We had lots of sunshine again today. Tonight, clouds will be rolling in, bringing a 60% chance of rain and a low near 2 degrees. Tomorrow, chance of showers once again and a high near 7. Saturday, the temperature will drop even further with a risk of snow and a high of only 0. Sunday, more flurries developing with a high of only +1. Monday should be snow mixed with rain and a high near 4 degrees. A high pressure system returns on Tuesday, bringing lots of sunshine and a high near 10. Even warmer on Wednesdays, we should hit 12 degrees. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 18 degrees and an average low of 3. The highest temperature of the state was recorded in 1943 at 32 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -4 in 1965. Sunrise was at 7:23, sunset at 7:22. Looking at tomorrow's national temperatures now, Victoria will have showers and a high of 14. Vancouver will also receive some rain and 14 degrees. Expect rain mixed with snow in Calgary on Friday and a high of only 5. Mostly cloudy and 4 degrees for Edmonton. A chance of showers and 9 for Regina tomorrow. Overcast and 7 expected in Saskatoon. A mixture of sun and cloud and 12 degrees for Winnipeg. Just a few clouds and a balmy 23 is on tap for Toronto. Mainly cloudy and 21 degrees for Ottawa. Lots of sunshine and 19 for Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mostly cloudy and 18. Halifax, Nova Scotia should receive some rain and 19. Charlottetown, PEI will have light showers and 18. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect periods of drizzle and a high near 13 degrees tomorrow. Shares in Beyond Meat were up 9% after McDonald's announced a test sale of its veggie burgers in Canada. The fast food chain says it will begin selling the plant-based patty dubbed the PLT beginning at 28 restaurants in Ontario on Monday. The 12-week pilot project will help determine if the company will offer the product permanently across more of its markets. The pilot is rolling out about 6 months after Burger King began testing the plant-based burger and more than a year after A&W added the veggie burger to its menu in Canada. Tim Hortons announced that it was pulling its Beyond Meat burgers across the country. Contract talks between General Motors and striking auto workers in the United States took a step closer to reaching a settlement. The committees finished their work in Detroit and sent their recommendations to the top bargainers. It means some of the minor issues have been resolved, but wages and use of temporary workers still need to be discussed. The strike by 49,000 workers has halted production at some 55 GM factories and GM parts plants in the United States. The ripple effect also shut down GM Oshawa's assembly plant and forced layoffs at its St. Catharines engine plant. GM dealers are also starting to run short of repair parts at their service centers. Chinese importers have set deals to purchase American soybeans and pork as the two governments make gestures ahead of trade talks. The announcement follows Beijing's decision to lift tariffs on soybeans, which is China's biggest import from the United States. Chinese and American negotiators are set to meet next month in Washington for a 13th round of talks aimed at ending the dispute over trade and technology that threatens to tip the global economy into a recession. Johnson & Johnson is appealing an Oklahoma judge's $572 million judgment against the company and its subsidiaries for helping to fuel the opioid crisis. The appeal says the ruling was an unprecedented interpretation of Oklahoma public nuisance law. Last month, a judge in Cleveland ordered the company to pay the money to help address the damage the opioid crisis has caused in Ohio. Lawyers for the company have said figures being thrown around are grossly inflated. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 6 points on the day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 79 points. The Nasdaq was down 46 points to 8,030, and the S&P 500 was down just over 7 points to 2977. Oil was up 5 cents on the day to $56.54 per barrel. Natural gas was down 7 cents to $2.43. Gold was up 79 cents to $15.05 per ounce, and silver was down a cent to $17.82 per ounce. Wheat is at $205 per metric ton, barley's at $200, canola at $4.49, and corn is at $277 per metric ton. Live cattle is down 5 cents to 103.35. Feeder cattle is down 8 cents to 141.70. Lean hogs were down 35 cents to 65.08. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 75.37 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a Lethbridge police report says calls to police in and around the supervised consumption site in Lethbridge have gone up substantially. Interim Police Chief Scott Wood says calls at 1016 First Avenue South went from 7 for March of 27 to the end of February of 2018 to 424 between March of 2018 and the end of February of this year. That is an increase of close to 6,000%. Some of the recent polls are out showing the federal election is too close to call. The Liberals and Conservatives are running neck and neck. Political science professor Jeffrey Hale explains what some of the biggest issues are heading into the October 21st vote and what it'll take for a party to win. That interview is coming up. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Christian recording artist Steve Bell is performing in concert September 28th at First Baptist Church in Lethbridge beginning at 7:30 p.m. Enjoy a night of stories and music featuring old favorites and new songs from his latest album, Where the Good Way Lies. For tickets, visit stevebell.com or call 1-800-854-3499. The 30th Annual Giant Pumpkin Festival and Auction in support of the Children's Wish Foundation is taking place Saturday, September 28th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Greenhaven Garden Center. Come out and enjoy face painting, wagon rides, a petting zoo, plus a live and silent auction, and much more. All proceeds benefit the Children's Wish Foundation in Southern Alberta. Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-centered recovery program for any hurt, hang-up, and habit. This group meets Friday nights at the Park Meadows Baptist Church. The evening begins at 6 p.m. with supper and follows with an opportunity to share and connect with others in small groups. For more information, visit celebraterecovery.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
It has been a very eventful week on the federal election campaign trail, and joining me now in studio to discuss it and dissect it all is Dr. Jeffrey Hale, political science professor at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome back to BCN.
Good to be with you this afternoon, Hal.
That's good. So, Dr. Hale, let's start things off first of all talking about the Justin Trudeau blackface or brownface scandal. Has it really hurt the image and the brand of the Liberal Party that much?
Well, I think it may have hurt the brand, but fair-minded people realize that even immature 20-year-olds can grow up.
Or 29-year-olds.
Or 29-year-olds, 20-somethings.
Right.
And the real issue on the ballot is, for good or ill, do you trust this man to run the country today?
Well, and that actually lends itself back to the SNC Lavalin scandal. I mean, there have been other issues as well, which maybe have tarnished the Liberal brand.
And I think for people who are paying attention, these are issues of concern. However, as Preston Manning used to say, it's not just are you the perfect candidate, but in the eyes of the people whose votes you need, are you better than the guy you're running against?
One of the platform policies that the Liberals are campaigning on right now is more gun control. You know, and of course, obviously in the bigger cities like Toronto, where there's a real issue, more so with gangs than so much with the guns, but here in rural Alberta, you know, when you talk gun control and taking rifles away from farmers and ranchers, that really doesn't fly.
Well, I think this is symbolic politics for people who don't think anybody needs a handgun, but your point is well taken. If the police have to drive 50 kilometers to get to your house to give you some protection in the middle of the night, having some kind of weapons to protect yourself, or if you're a farmer or a rancher, your animals from predators, is part of what's necessary to protect your family. So we'll see what the Liberals come up with. The focus on assault weapons is probably more defensible than handguns, but we'll see how it plays out.
Now, the Liberals also announced they will not tax the first $15,000 of income, and the Tories want to lower the income tax bracket to 13.75%. They seem like very similar plans here. What are your thoughts?
They're relatively minor differences. I think there is a perception that there are a lot of people who are just getting by, living from paycheck to paycheck, so this will make a difference at the margin. If you're paying taxes already, the Tory proposal, well, if you're paying taxes already, both proposals will provide you with a small amount of help. If you're one of the third of Canadians who file tax returns that don't pay taxes yet, it's more symbolic politics than anything else.
Affordable housing seems to be a real issue as well when a lot of the candidates are going to the doors and campaigning. They're knocking right now. Do any of the party platforms have a leg up on this one to get voters' attention?
Again, this is symbolic politics, but the reality is that both what the Conservatives and what the Liberals are proposing have the potential to increase demand without increasing the supply of housing. That will push up prices, and the regulatory changes that are needed to increase supply are generally within provincial jurisdiction, not federal jurisdiction. So they're trying to appear responsive, but a lot of the people who look at the numbers suggest that this may do as much harm than good.
And speaking of the numbers, according to the recent polls, it's really tight, especially in central Canada, Ontario and Quebec, between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And across Canada, could we potentially see a minority government?
It's possible that we could see a minority government. However, I think the media has done a massive disservice to the average thinking voter by looking at national horse race numbers. We don't have a national election. We have a whole bunch of regional, in many cases sub-regional elections, because the patterns of party competition vary hugely across the country. The 1 or 2 point spread in the polls reflects a 40-point spread in Alberta between the Conservatives and the Liberals. The Liberals are well ahead in Quebec, but those general numbers mask very significant differences in the sub-regional numbers in Quebec. There's a big difference between Montreal, where a yellow dog could get elected running as a Liberal, and suburban Quebec City, which leans more towards the Conservatives. And I think the big difference will be in the suburban areas of Montreal, which are traditionally nationalist. They're overwhelmingly French-speaking, and the Bloc Québécois could actually come up the middle there and take a number of seats.
How about in Ontario? A lot of seats in Ontario, a lot of big battlegrounds. Rural Ontario may go Conservative, maybe the bigger centres, Ottawa, Toronto, Liberal. I mean, what are we looking at there?
Well, there was a poll in the papers today, even with small sampling, that showed the Conservatives running fourth in the city of Toronto, but being competitive in the GTA, the suburban belt around metropolitan Toronto. And so those races and who turns out and who stays home will make a tremendous difference.
What about the Atlantic provinces out in the Maritimes? Is that still strong Liberal territory?
I think the cities, by and large, are, although the Conservatives might be competitive in one of the St. John's, Newfoundland ridings. However, in New Brunswick, you have a provincial Conservative government that has recently been elected, and a lot of the traditionally English-speaking ridings in New Brunswick, which have gone Conservative in the past, many of those people are running for election again, so they're known quantities. In Nova Scotia, the Conservatives are competitive in a number of seats where longtime Liberals like Scott Bryson have stepped down. And in Atlantic Canada, individual MPs, like lots of small town Canada, individual MPs, individual candidates make a lot more of a difference. So if a long-term incumbent has stepped down, a seat could be competitive where it wouldn't be otherwise.
How about Newfoundland and Labrador?
That one's harder to tell. The Conservatives in Newfoundland have not been close to the Conservatives federally since the days of Danny Williams, so it's hard to see where the Conservatives would pick up much support there.
Now, Dr. Hale, are the Tories a lock here in Western Canada? I mean, we can say yes for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, I'm assuming?
Well, again, you have Winnipeg, and you have the rest of the province.
Right.
If you looked at the results of the recent provincial election, downtown Winnipeg was NDP. The University District elected a couple of Liberals. The suburban areas voted fairly solidly Conservative, although there were some close races.
So Flin Flon, Brandon?
Flin Flon and Brandon
Thompson.
will be Liberal or NDP. Flin Flon and the North will be NDP.
Oh, wow.
Or possibly Liberal. The southwestern part of the province, including Brandon, will be solidly Conservative. So again, provincial numbers don't make up the whole story, where you've got a significant urban, suburban, rural divide.
Now, British Columbia is interesting. Tell me a bit about that.
The interior, again, will lead Conservative. The Fraser Valley probably as well. Where it gets interesting is where you get into Greater Vancouver. The Conservatives are competitive in suburban Vancouver ridings with large Chinese Canadian populations. They're not as competitive in areas with large South Asian populations. And you could see 3 or 4 party races in some of the suburban ridings going up the Fraser Valley.
Let me ask you a bit about Ontario again. Do you think that Doug Ford cuts, all the cut really hurt the Conservative image in Ontario, even federally?
I don't know how much it was the cuts and how much it was Mr. Ford's ham-handed management style. People like people will accept sacrifice if they think it's being done competently and fairly. Doug Ford is an albatross on the Tory brand in Ontario.
If we see a Liberal minority government on October 21st, do you see maybe either the NDP or the Green Party propping up Justin Trudeau and the Liberals?
I think it's more likely that they will support the Liberals than the Conservatives. The question is how many bloc members will be elected and how will that play into the results?
You know, what's interesting as well is there was a recent survey which talked about the amount of fundraising that was done. And apparently the Conservatives federally raised twice the amount of money as the Liberals. So if there was a minority government and another election, the government failed, another election was called, the Conservatives could afford another campaign where the Liberals could not.
Well, that may play a role, although the Conservatives' big challenge is to expand their pool of second choice votes. All the polling data that I've seen suggests that for the Liberals, the Greens, the NDs, they are one another's second choices. The Conservative second choice pool is limited to a relatively small proportion of the Liberal vote. And that polarization is something that Mr. Scheer and the Conservatives are going to have to figure out, because right now it's not working to their advantage.
What about the advertising? You know, a lot of the advertising from the Conservatives seems to be slamming and putting down Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. He's not as advertised, he was never ready. Is that negativity a negative on the voters as well?
I think where you have a competitive negative advertising rate, it has a tendency to depress turnout, because there are an awful lot of Canadians who are not strong partisans one way or the other. So the more negative your ads are, the more they may reinforce your core supporters. They may reinforce people who might be thinking of voting for the opposition, but this gives them a reason for a second thought. However, those people can just as equally stay home. Last time we had a big jump in support or in public turnout between 2011 and 2015, especially among young people. It's quite possible we could see a much lower turnout this time around.
You know, a lot of the constituents I've spoken to as well, they say, you know, I'd rather hear what you offer as a candidate as opposed to what the other guy's not offering. That's what they're saying about Scheer and Justin Trudeau. But it seems like even the Liberals are having some of that negative attack style ads right now.
Well, running against Andrew Scheer is a little bit like running against the Pillsbury Doughboy. So you have to connect him to other Conservatives who have a little more of an edge if you want to run negative ads. That's why the Liberals have been trying to tie Mr. Scheer to Doug Ford, who, as we've said, has a pretty poor public image in Ontario right now.
What about the Liberal health care plan compared to the Conservatives? What are the fundamental differences?
There's not a huge amount of detail in either one. The Liberals are talking national pharmacare, maybe, but it depends what we negotiate with the provinces. For the provinces, this is an old story. The federal government wants to buy change. The first question of the provinces is, this is a lot of money. We already have healthcare systems that are fairly stretched. How can we count on you to follow through on that promise over the long term? Because we've seen cases in the past where the feds have made promises and then have not delivered after an extended period of time. So the capacity of both levels of government to follow through on those commitments becomes critical. With the Conservatives, they're saying we will continue the path we've been on and that the previous government has been on for the last 15 years or so. We will promise you stable increases in funding if people want you to spend more money on filling the gaps in drug benefits. Then that's something to be worked out between provincial governments and their citizens. And there is something to be said about that. It's not flashy, it's not dramatic, it may be more sustainable.
Several parties have made major promises when it comes to climate change. It's a real hot button issue right now. Retrofitting buildings, doing less fracking, no fossil fuel power plants, no more pipelines. That doesn't sit well here in Alberta. Do you think that would actually resonate with some of the voters here?
There are the pragmatic, incremental things that can help people do a lot of little things that over time can make a difference. The splashier the promise, the more it involves taking people's jobs away, and that's harder to sell. It's the Green Plan to shut down the oil sands over a relatively short period of time reminds me of the Russian plan to redistribute the East German economy eastwards.
Right.
And so, given the fact that provinces own and control their resources, to say, for a federal party to say, we're going to shut down the biggest industry in a province is inviting a constitutional battle that is reminiscent of what Mr. Trudeau Mr. Trudeau Sr. walked into in the 1980s, and it just about tore the country apart.
You know, we're seeing some of the battles going on right now with Jason Kenney, our premier, vowing to fight C-48 and C-69 in court.
Well, that's what the courts are for.
Right.
And he may win or he may lose, depending on the quality of the arguments that he makes. Simply generating rhetoric won't do it. You have to show where in the Constitution, based on what precedents the federal government has overreached, and you have to do your homework. And if the province's lawyers have the capacity to do so, they may knock a hole in the federal government's case. On the tax issue per se, as opposed to the regulatory issue, it's going to be harder for them to do so.
Jagmeet Singh, federal NDP leader. He's got a little bit of pizzazz. He's wonderful turbans, great colors, good-looking guy. He's actually younger than Trudeau. I think he's 40 years old, same age as Andrew Scheer. But do you think the federal NDP would actually be further ahead with Tom Mulcair still as the leader, as opposed to Jagmeet Singh?
Well, Mr. Singh's election has changed the landscape for the New Democrats in terms of their achievable voter support. And unfortunately, this speaks to some of the cultural divisions within Canada. I think there is fairly widespread acceptance in English Canada that we are a multicultural society, and the community that you're part of, the God you worship, should not be relevant to your running for public office. Some people are better at that on both the right and the left than others. However, in Quebec, they don't have a policy of integration of immigrants. Bring the best of your culture, be a fully participating member of society as somebody who is, for example, both Sikh and Canadian. They are much more into the old-fashioned melting pot style of assimilation en français. And so Mr. Singh is facing a very strong cultural gap. Mr. Mulcair was building on the success of Jack Layton, being the center-left party of choice in Quebec, and that was part of the reason the Liberals have shifted as far to the left as they have. With Mr. Singh's background and making the Toronto and Vancouver and other major city suburbs the battleground of choice, that's a whole lot harder to sell in Quebec.
Political science professor from the U of L, Dr. Jeffrey Hale, thanks again for joining me in studio.
My pleasure.
Teenagers and depression is usually not a very good combination. A recent study shows a correlation between social media use and increased depression rates for teenagers. Joining me now in studio to discuss this is Graham Bretherick, a registered psychologist and president of Run Free Ministries and author as well of Healing Life's Hurts. Welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you, Hal. It's good to be here again.
Now, Graham, a study by researchers at a hospital in Montreal found that screen time, especially on social media, is linked to increased depression on teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we really combat that?
Well, it doesn't surprise me to hear that. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the ways we combat it is they need to interact when you're on screen all the time, you're very isolated emotionally, you're isolated cognitively, and so that isolation, let me just define, can I define depression for you?
Sure, go ahead,
it's
yeah.
very different than most people's. I see depression as anger turned in on yourself. So I'm angry at you, but I can't take it on you because you're my boss, you're my parent, you're my brother, or whatever else, or I feel bad about myself, etc. So it must be my fault. Must be me. So what I'm talking about with depression is I'm really angry at myself. Surprising enough, yeah.
So getting back to screen time, I know a lot of my
Okay.
kids too, they were, either on the Xbox or they're on their phones all the time. And I've noticed there's a bit of a disconnect with their friends when it comes to one-on-one interaction.
Right.
I don't know about you, but when I was a kid growing up, I'd hop on my bicycle, I'd go out to the arcade, go to my buddies listening to music.
Yes.
We'd go on our bikes and ride till the sun set.
Right.
After we did our homework, of course, right?
Of course.
So how can we kind of get back to that with a lot of today's young people?
Well, the challenge is you've got the trends of today bending in the direction of this whole social media thing. And I think the only way is that parents have to set up things with kids that they get interaction, they get involved, they have limited time on the screen, etc. I mean, they have to involve themselves in interaction with other people. It's a human race is about interaction and relationships.
You know, it's interesting though, sometimes my kids are playing, like I said, an Xbox game, but they're playing with their buddies in other countries,
Yes,
other
they are.
cities. They say, hey Dad, I'm interacting with other people, my buddy's here, they can hear me on my headset.
Right. Well, but it's a type of interaction, but it's depersonalized. Isn't that what we'd say? It's not face-to-face. And so there's a measure of, it's like being on television all the time. I mean, this is not a real, this is not real life. This is, this is television. If you want to get real life, you get out of the studio and you have real relationship with your wife and your kids and et cetera.
You mean you're not actually here right now?
Apparently I'm not.
Nice holographic image.
I'm a figment of your imagination.
You know, a lot of times too, Graham, when it comes to young people on Instagram, for instance, a lot of young people, they'll put photos of themselves.
Yes.
They're perfect.
Yes.
Their lives are perfect.
Yes.
And then other teenagers may see that, say, my life isn't as perfect. And will they get depressed when they look at others
Yes.
who are leading the so-called perfect lives?
Yes, because really they're saying, I'm angry at myself because I'm not as good as or compared to or whatever. See, again, that's my definition. Depression is when you turn the anger in on yourself. And if you think about it, we often describe depression by its symptoms. But I'm not sure that's the best way to go. There are symptoms related to depression. But I think it's better to be able to say, actually, how does depression come about? So it's in a sense, it's like being put in an old dry well. All right, and so you go down and you put down, and so when you look up, it looks like a long way, can I get out of here? It's muddy and sticky down there, so I feel really stuck. The walls feel like they're caving in on me, and I feel hopeless. That's a good description of depression. It's like a hole in the ground. In fact, geographically, or geologically, whatever, what is a depression? It's a hole in the ground.
So how can we really encourage our kids or our grandchildren not to compare themselves with others who have created maybe this false sense of reality?
Well, I mean, they're going to do it anyway. I mean, that's human nature, is to compare. I grew up with a twin brother, and I compared myself to him all the time. And my
Did you ever stack up?
I didn't. In fact, in that sense, I always thought I was less than my brother. Now, it was a lie. And see, I believed that, and so I functioned out of that sense of inferiority. And I don't know that I was depressed, but I had times in which I felt really bad about myself. So it might be a type of minor depression in a sense.
So he didn't make you feel bad about
No.
yourself, nor did your parents.
No.
But it was kind of like self-critical behavior?
Yeah, and because you see, the issue is my own identity. The issue is, who do I really think I am? When I'm comparing myself to somebody else, I'm going to have a false picture of who I really am.
So how can we then as parents encourage our kids to really look inside themselves and understand how beautiful and special they are, regardless of what people are saying on social media? So they don't compare themselves to others on Instagram or wherever, right?
Well, it's actually about communication. The question is, how much family communication occurs? When I occasionally pull my phone up at the table, my wife says, love the ones you're with, Graham. So I put my phone down. You're absolutely right. I shouldn't be on my phone at the dinner table. We should be having interaction and communication. But how much interaction and communication is occurring today in our family systems? Not sure. And I think that's a part of so do we have time where we turn the television off and we just we turn the internet systems off and we just have time to
put our phones away?
Put our phones away. Right.
How important is that communication for building the family dynamic?
Well, I think it's central because life is about communication. I mean, if I don't communicate, I don't really know who you are. Before we came on the program, we shared a few things and we talked, and so I get to know a little bit more about Hal Roberts, and you get to know a little bit more about me. So if we don't communicate, we really don't get anywhere in terms of building a sense of confidence, identity, clarity of who I am and what I'm doing in life and where I'm going.
What are some of the symptoms that we should be aware of if we're falling into a state of depression? Certain things we really have to be aware of, not just for ourselves, maybe our spouse and our kids or our grandkids.
Well, loneliness would be one of the factors, withdrawal, hunger, lack of appetite, a sense of hopelessness, in being inward focused. Those would be sort of the typical symptoms of depression.
And a lot of that would be dealt with through counseling, through medication, maybe a combination of the two?
Well, I'm not a big fan of medication. If we have to use, I can't give medication anyway because I'm a psychologist, not a psychiatrist.
Right.
But I wouldn't recommend it because basically what happens, if you think about what happens to your brain when you get depressed, you're changing your chemistry. Over time, that's what you do. Start believing lies about yourself. Your emotions are an electrochemical factory within you. And so you start believing lies about yourself and you affect your chemistry. So that's why the medical system primarily says, well, let's treat him with antidepressants, because then it will change your chemistry back again, but it never deals with the root. And so when you don't deal with the root, it's gonna build up and catch up again. So we can take drugs till the cows come home. In my estimation, it won't fix anything. Now, if a person is severely depressed, then sometimes we have no choice. Otherwise, they might commit suicide. But we don't want to use drugs. We want to use psychotherapy or counseling to get people back on track. And because it's anger-based. See, that's my premise anyway. It's based on anger. So I'm angry at you because you don't like me, you won't treat me this way, etc. But I can't tell you that because you're bigger than me, you're smarter than me, you're my parent, or you have an authority over me. So it must be my fault. So that's what depression is. I keep turning that anger in on myself. I don't like me.
Is that almost addictive as well? I've worked in the media for 31 years now.
Yes.
And I've worked with many people in the media who can be very self-critical and they're critical of others.
Yes.
They become very toxic in their nature, but they feed off of it. They love the drama, they love the toxicity, and sometimes you have to distance yourself from people like that.
Right.
You pray for them and you really hope that they get better, but it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, well, because it becomes your identity. And a lot of times our work becomes our identity, which is better to bring our identity into our work than our work become our identity.
How do we make sure we don't bring that home?
Well, it's a learned thing. Same thing for me in counseling. How do I not take depressed people that I'm dealing with and then become depressed myself because I'm dealing with all these depressed people? And I simply have to say, this is my work, and this is my home, and I have to divide between the two.
Recent stats say that the average Canadian teenager spends between 6 to 7 hours in front of a screen, whether it's the phone, their laptop, whatever the case is.
Right.
So as parents, how should we monitor that? And should we maybe have them cut down to 2 to 3 hours a day? Or is that too much of a shock to their system?
It might be. I think we have to provide another alternative. Part of the issue, I think, from my perspective, is parents are not as involved with their kids as they used to be. And so they're both working or they're both involved in some kind of extra home issues, etc. They're out there. And so their kids are not getting the time of family time that they need for the interaction. That's what I feel. We need to rethink about what we're doing in our homes. And that's one of to me, one of the tragedies. We as parents, we're on our phones. We're on the screen. We're watching television and our shows, etc. So our kids are just simply copying us. And that lack of interaction and lack of time together is difficult.
I remember this one time I took my family out for dinner, and it was quite funny because my kids were sitting beside each other, texting each other, not talking to each other, but guess who they're talking about? Mom and Dad.
Give me your phone. Give me your phone.
Right, give me your phone. Is that what you're saying about, like, what's going on here? What about online bullying? That's a real issue today in today's society, especially in Western culture here. Yeah. So as parents, how can we combat that and really protect our children?
Well, bullying is basically anger. Think about it again. If I'm bullying you, I'm an angry individual. I think I can take advantage of you, so I bully you. Now, whether it's online or it's face-to-face, but that's the thing with online, we don't have a lot of understanding of what's going on there. So your daughter or son can be on that and be bullied, and you don't even know what's going on. And that turns into depression, which then sometimes turns into suicide, and we know stories of that.
You know what's really sad is a lot of times I spend time on Twitter.
Right.
I'm in the social media world quite a bit, being in the media here. And a lot of people who are attacking are faceless, nameless people. They'll have an account, and they'll have a picture of a cloud or something, and they're the keyboard warrior. They feel they control and they can attack you.
Right.
And yet I've got my name on social media and my picture, but they're not. They're faceless and nameless.
Right.
So why would I take any credence, or why would I put any stock into what they're having to say? But a lot of people do, don't they?
Right, right. It's a very popular thing to do. And the thing is, the adolescent group is caught up in that whole thing. And if everyone's doing it, why aren't I doing it? So there's the lack of individual identity, a lack of individual understanding of who I really am. And I get caught up. I mean, teens have always been caught up in that. It's not just in this time. Right. But it becomes more difficult because of the involvement on the internet and it's nameless, faceless, etc.
Outside of social media, Graham, what else do you think contributes to depression today?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do, as I've been saying again, is that I'm really angry, but I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to describe it. If I'm not having interaction, how do I tell someone? How do I tell my dad or my mom, like, this really frustrated me when you did this? So there's no communication skills out there. So then if I can't tell them, where am I going to take that anger? And a lot of happens, it must be then be my fault. Or I grow and grow in this anger, and then all of a sudden I let it out in a rage.
When I was younger too, I remember, Graham, hearing stories from my friends where their fathers would always put them down.
Right.
You're a loser, you're never going to amount to very much, it's your fault, it's your fault. And that can really impact somebody's psyche as well.
Totally.
As a young man or as a young woman.
Right.
So how do we make sure, as parents, it never reaches that point, and how do we make sure we always build each other up, especially our children?
Well, potentially parents have to come out of their own struggles with who they are and their identity, because you will put somebody down as a reflection of what I feel about myself.
Do you feel you're lifting yourself up by putting somebody else down?
Yes, they do. It's a false form of trying to elevate yourself. I actually did that myself in my years of inferiority. But how do we do it? We need to communicate. We need to be able to be honest in our interactions, our communication. We need to have time together, shut the TV off, playing games, for example, or go out and
like board games.
Hiking, or board games, or go out and go for a hike, for a walk, go camping, do things that take you outside of the environment of just the electronic media.
Do you think depression is really the opposite of hope?
In one sense, yes. Because when we're depressed, I don't have, one of the symptoms of depression is I don't have much hope. So clearly we want to bring people who are depressed, I have to get rid of their anger first. In therapy, that's what I do. I work their anger out, but then I also project them in the direction of hope for themselves for the future.
How about if somebody has a specific purpose in life? It may be a goal to try and achieve.
That helps.
Do you think that'll help too?
It helps a lot, yeah.
In what way? Can you explain that?
Well, because I'm building myself towards something, and I'm not feeling bad about myself. Like, if I don't have a place to put my energy and my time, etc., I'm going to be very self-focused. If I'm self-focused, I'm in danger of being depressed.
How about the influences surrounding ourselves with a good support group, and we have to maybe choose our friends a little more carefully? What are your thoughts on those?
Well, one of the advantages of church, quite frankly, is it's an interacting place, potentially. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to. You could go to a church and come and leave and never talk to anybody. That's the potential. But it's designed as a place. So community, whether it's community centers, whether it's hockey or sports, etc., we need interaction. We're not designed for being able to look at a screen the whole time.
But let's look at this book once again here. Graham Bretherick, registered psychologist, president of Run Free Ministries, and author of Healing Life's Hurts. Thanks a lot for joining me on Bridge City News.
You're welcome. Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Take care.